we visit Iceland whenever we can, every few years, and I'm particularly interested in the literature of Iceland and also the faces and people. And I did a series of drawings from a book I found where we were staying, and it was genealogy. And they love their genealogy in Iceland, so they have photographs, even drawings of their ancestors, and then they produce books of family trees. And these faces were so interesting, and a lot of the ladies were dressed in traditional Icelandic dress, and this is a 19th century face. And one of the things that the ladies used to do in their daily lives in the farmlands was to keep eider ducks. They'd farm the eider ducks. And so I imagine her as looking after the eider ducks who would live amongst the reeds and sort of collect the eider down and make quilts and things out of it. So it's kind of, that's in my way of thinking. It's not necessarily what ends up in the picture, but it just kind of gives me ideas as to how to use the imagery. And it's made out of 2 plates, and they're both pieces of cardboard cut to the same size, and these photocopies I stuck onto the cardboard. Her face, I cut her out and stuck her on and used her as a kind of a template, so that where the dark areas are here, that's carborundum powder that I sprinkle onto glue. You paint with glue. Sprinkle the carborundum powder on so that when the ink is finally put on, the carborundum holds the glue. It's like an aqua tint. It holds the ink, rather. It holds it in a way that aqua tint would do. So you get dark areas, solid areas of colour. And then I scratched into the plate over where the photocopy was. So I was sort of tracing almost with an etching needle into the cardboard. Then it was sealed with a PVA glue. And then the background, which is where all the colour is, that was a mixture of, there's some carborundum, some scratching into the cardboard. And then when I put the ink on, I used a mixture of rolling the ink on with rollers, smudging it on with scrim, a material all sort of scrunched up, and then sort of wiping off some areas and putting more ink on in others. Then I printed the colour first, and then the black second plate over the top of that. And so you get sort of very clean colours underneath, and then these nice kind of textured blacks over the top. So it's printed like an etching, in other words. And you can see here, you can see lots of little marks where I've actually stippled the cardboard with a pointed tool. And then where the areas of black are, that's the carborundum powder. And when I clean off the excess, you get a nice kind of smudgy line around it, so that it's not a print that has clean edges. It has a lot of smudging. It's more like a painting or a drawing in many ways. Kind of pretty much how I approach it, because I spent a lot of years away from printmaking, painting. And when I came back to printmaking, I didn't want the kind of clean edges that you can get with, say, lino cuts and different sorts of printing. I like one colour smudging into the next. I used a lot of watercolour, and I would have one colour merge into the next. So I wanted to find some way of doing that, and it's quite difficult with a plate that you're going to take multiple prints from, because the colours can become very muddied, especially if you're using, like in this one, a lot of yellow and then this kind of silver colour. You can start to find that it gets very muddy, and you start to lose the freshness of the colour. So you have to be quite careful. And that was all printed in one go on a plate. So I would swirl a lot of the yellow on, and there are a couple of different yellows, and there is also this silver colour which is put on with a roller, and then also just briefly wiped across the surface of this very textured plate. And I took 10 prints of that, and each one has slightly different colours. And I had to be very careful to make sure that this yellow didn't start getting very muddy and clogged up and grey. Yeah, there's a lot of textures in that. There is sandpaper, glue, tissue paper, acrylic pastes, all kind of swirled on, very freestyle, to get the feel of sand that a car has driven across and people have walked on, and the wind has has sort of moulded and that the sea has come and washed things up onto. Because actually it was a beach with a lot of texture and there was a lot of wind that day. So it wasn't a flat surface at all. And then here is where the tide is going out and you have the reflection of the sky. This is a different one. Yeah, this is not part of an edition. This is a one-off. But it has a lot of the usual elements that I use. The figure is made from a combination of a colograph, once again, a cardboard plate, that I have used carborundum for the dark areas on, and also I've used some stenciling and some just applying by hand and brush small areas of colour just to give the blush to the skin. I've used some fabric which I've cut to the shape of the bodice, raffia which I've actually laced the figure with so that the lacings of the corset are raffia, and all the butterflies are hand printed onto a combination of Japanese tissue paper and a coloured paper, so that they're sort of fused together with an etching plate over the top, all cut out individually and then placed. And there are 2 layers of tissue paper on top of some of the butterflies to make them seem as if they're receding into the distance. And then the ones who are placed on top of that, I curled their wings a little bit so that they had a bit more three-dimensional, a bit more of a 3 dimension to them. And then I've raised the figure away from the back of the plate so that some of the butterflies are sort of behind her. So it's a bit more 3-dimensional. This is the camel with his minder. It's the most recent one that I've done, and that's a colograph again, and much the same as the Icelandic woman. It's 2 plates, and the first plate has the colour with the colour detail on, the reds and the blues, and the top plate has the very dark areas, this very dark green, which is all carborundum powder once again, and quite a lot of fine line work where I've scratched into the cardboard. And so there's quite a lot of merging of colours once again. And I actually put on blocks of colour. I put a block of colour on the camels, on all the drapery on the top of the camel. There's a colour for the camel, a colour for the camel minder's overcoat. And when I've started to clean up the plate, and blue on the sky, and when I've started to clean up the plate, some of those have merged outside of it. So the wall is actually created out of a lot of those colours being pulled in together and then cleaned off. And the textures of the plate pick up all the different colours, and it sort of has a rather nice uniform, old-fashioned, slightly faded sort of photograph look to it. And it's kind of more the way that I want to go with my work, in that it looks like old photograph. There's a lot of texture, like the cracking that's on the varnish here. I really love that. It's nothing to do with material. It's purely a texture that you get from a printing plate, but it kind of has an aging look to it. And the Josephine Baker one here, that's all the colour was put on at once. So that was one plate, printed once through the press. There was no overprinting on that. And that was a question of how do I put those colours together. And it's quite a simple sort of palette, really. There's her skin tones, the black for her hair and her wrist ornaments and the elephant that she's holding, the colours that are on the drapery, and then the colour for the background, the blue colour for the background. So that was just a question of very gingerly putting it on roughly in those areas and then working those colours into those areas and making sure that I sort of blended them. And it was a question of doing it by eye, guesswork, and just what I've learnt over the years of how to blend colours on a plate, and then just picking up a little bit of detail, rather like with the beach in that one, by rollings, just using the roller and rolling a bit over the top to pick up these textures on the drapery. The thing that drew me to the picture in the first place was this wonderful face that she has, and this is why I like people. I like to draw people and mess around with their images, or just look for expressions and unusual things, and sometimes old photographs give it to you in a way that there is a lot of modern photography captures movement, but a lot of old photography, you get these fabulous poses, but they're full of character, and something draws you towards them, and they're, just, she's so elegant, and there was something irresistible about her hand and her face and her expression, and she lends herself very well to figurative work.